Hey everyone, I'm Kevin with Victory 4x4. In today's video, we're going to be installing a set of our Blitz Rock Sliders on this 3rd gen Toyota Tacoma. So we are actually going to start things out here underneath the truck. We've got just a little bit of disassembly work to do before your sliders can go in place. For those of you equipped with a factory step, those are likely going to be body mounted out here with 6 to 8 bolts along the outer rocker panel area. Go ahead and remove those and discard those steps. Then as you come in here to the frame, you're going to be looking for a bolt that will be in this location. It'll use a 14mm socket or wrench to get it removed. As a reference, this is the cross member that your drive shaft ties into, or the drive shaft center support. You'll have one of those on each side. Then moving toward the front of the truck, this is specific to the driver's side. You're going to have 2 nuts to remove here where you see these exposed studs. For this, you'll need a 12mm socket, and you want to support this as you get the last nut removed, as this is holding just an electrical control box on the inside of the frame. Then continuing forward, you're going to have a couple things to remove up here. So in this kind of rectangle radius hole, you're going to have a black plastic plug that needs to be removed. You can pop those out with a flat screwdriver or a clip and panel tool like you see here. And then just in front of it, this is basically just like a sticker that you can peel off and discard as well. And then you want to get this harness and its 2 clips popped off of the frame. The clip tool works well here. These obviously have been removed before, so that kind of pops out pretty easy. And disregard this wiring, as this truck already had a set of sliders installed previously as well. Then moving to the inside of the frame, pretty much in that same location, you're going to have these black plastic caps to remove. Again, there's one of these on each side. You can take a 12mm socket and remove the nut here. Now before this can be fully removed on the driver's side, you're also going to have to pull the bolt holding this brake line bracket in place. This is also going to help give you just a little bit of room to install the nut plate up here in the frame. This again uses your 12. With this freed up on the frame, you can carefully pull out on that, as well as the plastic kind of cover or filler, if you will, and manipulate that out of the way. Now that we have the prep work done up on the vehicle, you can grab and identify your slider mounting legs. So to start off, the larger 2-leg mount you see here is going to be the rear, leaving this single leg mount to be the front. All of these mounting legs are going to angle slightly toward the rear of the vehicle, and then you can look for the arrow cutouts in the legs and the mounting bracket itself. Those will be forward facing when installed correctly. Now, as you can probably see, you do get a decent quantity of hardware with this kit. It's all pretty straightforward, so we'll kind of overview a little bit of that now before we get these legs installed. Now, we will kind of overview all of this as we continue through the video, but to start off, the black hardware you see here with nut clips and button head bolts is going to be kind of shown and installed later on when assembling the slider step boat itself. The shorter 1/2-inch hardware you see here is going to be used to mount that slider to these legs later on, so we can get these 2 out of the way. That leaves the remaining longer 1/2-inch hardware you see here to mount these legs to the frame. Now again, this still kind of looks like a lot. This is both the driver and passenger side hardware. So to kind of overview this before we get back up on the truck, you'll want to take one of these 1/2-inch bolts, a 1/2-inch washer, and then a larger 3/4-inch washer, and stack that assembly up like this. This is going to go through the hole in the frame and out toward the outside of the vehicle. Now we run these from the inside out because of all those lines and modules and things on the frame. It just kind of gives you a little bit more of a compact, discrete profile on the inside to keep it away from all of those items. Now with that being said, this will again protrude through the frame, and then when you install the slider leg, you'll be looking at something like you see here, and you will then install one of the 1/2-inch washers followed by the flange locking nut. Now again, we'll overview this and show you that along the way, but that was just to give you a general idea as some of this gets a little harder to see during the install. Now one thing I do want to mention before we throw the slider legs up here to the frame is if you're running any sort of skid plates like our gas tank skid here, case skid up front, you want the slider legs to mount tight to the frame, both on the side and bottom here, and then those skids to bolt in underneath so that you're not spacing the slider down and potentially misaligning any of the holes on the side. Now as you go to position this here on the frame, you're basically just looking for all of these cutouts to align with the various items on the frame along with the mounting holes. So these two large vertical slots line up with these large rivets. There's another large rivet here in the bottom, and then obviously the mounting holes along the way. Now moving to the very front mounting hole, we'll grab that hardware combination we just talked about. Again, slide it through from the inside of the frame. This is the same location as that electrical control box that we mentioned earlier on. And then grab that 1/2" washer and nut. Thread that on by hand, and that'll start to kind of help support this in place as we install the remaining hardware. As you move back down this slider leg, you'll be installing that same hardware combination in the kind of center slot you see here. As well as the rearmost slot just behind this rear mounting leg. Then moving to the bottom down here, specifically in this center slot, that is going to line up with that factory threaded hole where we removed a bolt kind of first thing in this install. We do provide you a longer metric bolt to go in that location as well as a washer to go on there. As you can see, ours doesn't really have any threads in this location. This is pretty common because that's a really fine thread from the factory that they kind of rust and get torn up during the bolt removal. So what you're going to see me install in this location is a 3/8 bolt with a washer and a flange locking nut that we'll be installing up on the top of the frame. That then just leaves the two outermost holes on this mount. The rear one you can see lines up with our gas tank skid. This one will actually share with our transfer case skid that we'll be installing later on. In each of these holes, you're going to be using another one of those longer 1/2" bolts with a washer and a flange locking nut. You will, however, have to drill these out to a 1/2" to accept these bolts. Now, to figure out where to drill, you're just going to be using the slider mount as a guide. Center punch and step those up with a couple drill bit sizes, working your way to a 1/2". These are already drilled, so you're not really going to be able to see us do that. So once you have those drilled, it should be as easy as sliding the bolt and washer in and installing the nut through the backside. Before the front mount can be installed, you'll need to find the nut plates you see here with the pre-installed nuts on the back. These are going to be slid through the rectangle holes here in the transmission mount cross member location. You should be able to simply kind of slide these in at an angle and drop them into place, and then slide that back up roughly centered over that hole. You can then move your front mount here into position, get that in behind the wire harness. Check this wire harness as you're getting it installed, making sure you're not pinching it between the gusset on the top of our slider leg and the body up here, which may mean pushing it up between the body and the frame. And then lining up that lower slot, you can then install another 1/2" bolt with a washer down here into that nut plate that we just slipped into the cross member. With the mount hanging on that lower bolt, you can grab another bolt and washer and then reach into the frame and line up that nut plate that we mentioned earlier on. And begin by starting this back bolt. Then you may just have to reach in and pivot that nut plate as you install another 1/2" bolt and washer in the front slot here. Once we have our slider mounts loosely installed on the frame, you can grab the slider itself along with the lower skid and do a little bit of assembly work here. We'll start by taking the slider and just kind of carefully setting it into the lower skid. You'll want to then kind of slide it from side to side and line up the mounting holes along this edge as well as the back side over here. In all 8 of the hole locations, there should be 4 along each side. You'll be installing black 5/16 button head bolts with serrated flange nuts. So go ahead and start all of those by hand. Now that we have the slider legs loosely installed on the vehicle, you can grab your slider itself as well as this lower skid. We'll drop the slider into the skid and line up the 4 holes on the front as well as rear edge. Now in all 8 of those holes, you'll be installing a 5/16 button head bolt with a washer and serrated flange nut on the inside of the slider. With all 8 of those started by hand, you can grab a 3/16 hex. I have a T-handle here, and tighten these up. Then we can install the clip nuts on the 6 mounting tabs along the bottom here, as well as the 5 holes along this back edge. As you kind of sort through these in your bolt pack, there are going to be 2 sizes. The larger 5/16 tabs go down here, and the smaller M6 tabs go along this back edge. Installing these is pretty straightforward. You just need to place the nut down and kind of start it on the edge here, and then press straight in until you hear these kind of audibly click into place. Lastly, you can install your lights into each end of the slider. For this, we provide you black 832 button heads with nylock nuts. Now, if the lights you receive have a plastic cover, go ahead and peel that off before you get them installed here. You can then feed the light and the nut in through the opening in the back of the slider, kind of get it lined up with the hole, and then install the bolts from the outside. Once you have both of these started by hand, you'll need an 11/32 wrencher socket for the nut on the inside and a 3/32 hex for the bolt head. Then go ahead and center this up, kind of press it flat to the inside of the slider, and then you may have to alternate back and forth just a little bit to get these tightened evenly. With those tightened up, you can repeat that process on the other side. Just let the wires hang for now, because we'll finish kind of wiring that up once they're installed on the truck. Now that you have the slider assembled, we can get it installed to the mounts here on the truck. For that, you'll find the shorter 1-inch long 1/2-inch bolts with washers and flange lock nuts. These you'll be installing kind of inside out like that to the mounts, with the slider over the face and the nuts inside of the slider. Those of you doing this kind of on the ground in your garage or your driveway, you can just set the boat on a floor jack, kind of jack it up into place pretty easily. Us working up here on the lift, I'm just going to throw it on our transmission jack and kind of get it positioned up here. Now as you get this up into position, you'll see the horizontal slots in the slider. You'll want to get those lined up with the holes in the bracket and start your hardware. You want to start all of these bolts all the way down the slider by hand, kind of get them just hand tight before you go any further. Once you have all the hardware started by hand to hold this boat on, take a step back and just check the front to rear alignment. Obviously those are slotted holes in the boat, so you have some movement here you can work with. What we found on Tacoma specifically is that you're going to likely want these all the way to the rear. Once you're happy with the alignment, you'll grab a 3/4 socket and wrench. The socket's not going to fit, depending on your tooling, in all of these locations. You may be able to get it in most of them if you just grab a swivel to put on here, but use the tools you have available to you. Once you have all the hardware tight out here, we can then go back underneath and tighten up all the mounting hardware to the frame. Now, we can note that all of the 1/2-inch hardware we used here will require 3/4 sockets and wrenches. Once you have the 2 main outside mounting bolts tight on this front mount, you can come in here and reinstall those plastic fillers. After that, be sure to reconnect the brake line bracket to the frame here, just reusing factory hardware. And then make sure that these lines get clipped back into their clips over here on the frame. After that, take a minute to look over here at your mounting bolts and kind of their relationship to these brake lines. You may have to manipulate these, kind of just pulling carefully up away from this bolt. As I mentioned earlier on, this truck already had some sliders on it previously, so this one's already kind of been moved. Yours will likely be closer, if not touching right here. Also there, make sure you're not pulling those out, as we do have to reinstall this electrical box, and you don't really want them rubbing against the back side of this either. Once you've done that here, you'll want to kind of check the same thing with the brake line on this center bolt in the rear mount, and then you can tighten this rear mount to the frame. Lastly, after you have all that hardware tight and you're happy with the alignment, you can reinstall this electrical box to the frame with factory hardware. And one last thing worth mentioning under here, if you're installing the provided metric bolt in this location at this cross member, you'll need a 14mm socket. The 3/8 bolt you saw me install earlier on will require a 9/16. So as we come back out here to kind of finish things up, I do want to talk about light wiring really quick. These can really be wired in any way you choose. You can wire them in to the dome light, you could wire them in to a set of rock lights. It kind of completely depends on your build configuration and also what you're running for switches. If you're doing it on an individual switch in the dash, if you have a switch controller up underneath the hood, it's all going to vary based on your specific vehicle. Now as far as wire routing, we provide you some cutouts in the vertical gussets here along your slider. You'll want to make sure if you're running this wire inside of the slider that you have it tucked neatly down in there, and then it's a good idea even to take a small piece of tape and just kind of tuck that down tight in there. This is just a good temporary solution so that when you put the step plate down in here, you know you're not going to pinch that wire. Once you have your wiring figured out, go ahead and grab your step plate. Now these, you're just going to tuck one end down into the slider, and then that should allow you to kind of pivot the step plate in and slide it back down through into the other end, and then line up your mounting hardware. As you're trying to get this lined up, if you're having any trouble adjusting it from side to side, you can always stick your Allen wrench or T-handle kind of in through to that clip nut and just pry gently back and forth until you have those aligned. Then you'll take the M6 button heads, that's the smaller button head hardware in your bolt pack, along with washers, and start them in the 5 back holes. With those started, you can now grab your logo step plate. You'll place this here along the bottom edge, line up the holes, and install more of the 5/16 button heads with washers that we used to bolt this skid on earlier on. With all of that hardware started, you can then grab a 4mm hex to tighten the M6 hardware along the back. And with those tight, you can then grab your 3/16 to tighten all the lower mounting hardware. Now at this point, the only thing really left to do on this side is to tidy up and tie in that wiring. If you haven't done so already and you weren't doing them simultaneously, you'll need to jump over to the other side now and repeat pretty much the same exact installation process. As a note here at the end, you may wind up with a little bit of additional hardware. That's just because some of our hardware packs are shared amongst multiple products, so don't worry about that. But as always, if you have any questions at all about that, about anything with this install or any other product we offer here at Victory 4x4, don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can always send us an email at info@victory4x4.com or call us at 269-459-8447.